Hello and welcome to the Clean Energy Show. I'm Pope Francis. I've just learned that I will not be paid to be the co-host of the Clean Energy Show, so effective immediately. I'm walking off the job. Workers of the world unite. A fair day's wage for a fair day's work. Now roll the theme music. No, wait. Don't.
Hello and welcome to episode 183 of the Clean Energy Show from the Celeste Hotel in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'm Brian Stockton.
And I'm James Whittingham. This week, why you shouldn't form an opinion based on watching a YouTube video. That is, of course, unless you're learning how to ice the perfect cake. That's different. I love cake.
A landmark ruling in the EU says that electric bikes are not motor vehicles and will be treated as bicycles under the law. They also said that unicycles are still unicycles, but you must wear clown shoes and juggle bowling pins while riding one.
Is hydrogen necessary for long-haul trucking? New real-life research with long-haul trucking companies has me doubting the need. I'm also doubting whether transatlantic blimps need hydrogen to operate as well.
The government of New Zealand has backtracked on their plans for a completely clean grid by 2030. Well, this is very disappointing news. They redeemed themselves by pledging not to help fund any more of those terrible Hobbit movies.
All that and more of this edition of the Clean Energy Show.
The race between climate change and the deployment of clean technology is on. The Clean Energy Show gives you a front row seat to the latest developments.
And also this week's show, Brian's electric drive trip through the far north of the continental United States, and what the solar eclipse does to solar generation. I'll tell you, it's not good for it. How are you, sir? And where are you traveling, Matt, this week?
Yeah, St. Paul, Minnesota. You know, you called it the far north of the United States. Everyone here calls it the Midwest, which seems weird because I had to drive so far east to get here. But I guess this is technically the Midwest. Yeah, so I'm here. We decided to take a road trip. I'll talk about the electric parts of that. But we were here to see the Judge John Hodgeman Podcast live at the Fitzgerald Theater, which is here in downtown St. Paul. It's a theater owned by Minnesota Public Radio, apparently. It's a 1910 theater that's been around a long time. It's been restored and still operating. But anyway, yeah, I'm a big fan of the Judge John Hodgeman Podcast. It's a comedy podcast. John Hodgeman settles disputes between people. You come to him with your household disputes, and he declares a winner, and it's very funny. It was a great show.
So totally worth the trip halfway across the continent to see a podcast. Let me guess on the ticket price. I want to guess on the ticket price. $38 US.
It was a little slightly higher, I think.
Oh, but you don't remember because, money's no object. You just,
That's right.
I'm going to this damn thing, and no matter what, that's what it's going to cost. Well, how was your trip there?
It was great. Yeah, the electric part, I'm going to talk about that. We also stopped in Fargo, North Dakota at our favorite theater, the Fargo Theater. It just sort of happened, the timing worked out, that we were there for silent movie night at the Fargo Theater, which was fantastic. I can tell you the tickets for that were $20 each. The Fargo Theater was built in 1926, so just when silent movies were at the end of their lifespan, talkies started in 27. So because it was built as a silent movie house, it has a giant pipe organ in it.
Cool.
Which is amazing.
The original pipe organ from 100 years ago.
Yep, from 100 years ago. So once a year, they do this thing, Silent Movie Night, where they have an organist play a live music score to a movie. So it was Safety Last, an old Harold Lloyd comedy. Fantastic. The organist was amazing. It was totally fantastic.
Wow, there's something you don't do every day.
No, 2 great nights. 2 events in a row. Yeah, it was another great electric road trip. It kind of went through Canada for the first half to Brandon and then south. Lots of chargers along the way. And every single stop, the car was ready before we were.
Really?
There was never a time where it's like, oh, okay, we got to wait 10 more minutes. So it really helps to have a car that has lots of battery, which we do. It's got lots of range. There's lots of chargers around here, especially once you get down to the Fargo area on that east-west route, I-94. There's lots of chargers, extra Tesla chargers. So lots of choices for where to stop. And we just happened upon the fairly new Tesla supercharger in Alexandria, Minnesota, which has the Magic Dock connector, which we talked about on the show, which is a built-in CCS adapter. It's built into the Tesla pedestal, and it allows you to charge a non-Tesla car with a CCS connector. So as we pulled up, there was a couple there in a Ford Mustang Mach-E that were just pulling up as well. They were there first. And so they were standing outside the car. They had a phone out. So clearly they were trying to figure out on the app how to make this work. And that did take them a few minutes. So, you have to somehow identify the charger on the app. And then the charger knows to give you the CCS adapter when you pull out the thing. So it took them several minutes for that. And then it took another few minutes. They had to inch the car forward quite a lot because the charge port on the Mustang Mach-E, it's on the driver's side near the front, but not right at the front. So they had to keep inching the car forward. So one of them was driving, one of them was giving directions with, it's okay, 2 inches, okay, 1 inch, with their hands, they really had to.
Pretty tight.
It was pretty tight.
That's true for a lot of vehicles, isn't it? Non-Teslas when they're trying to do charging at these V3 adapters.
Of course, no one was expecting this at the start of all this, that, if the other car makers had realized, hey, we're going to be using the Tesla network, they could have put the charge port in the same location it is on the Tesla cars. But it did work. And, they didn't have to take up any other spaces or anything. And, it was just me was the only other car charging. So that wasn't an issue. And then in Brandon, Manitoba, we got 256 kilowatts. That's a new record for me. The limit is supposed to be 250, but sometimes you get a little bit more than that.
That's about exactly 5 times what my car gets as a peak.
Yeah.
And I get happy when I see 50.
And I overheard the Mustang couple saying, oh, we're going to be here a long time. And so I don't know if that's because they weren't getting the full speed, or maybe they needed to do a full battery charge or something like that. Probably not quite the same experience.
All right. Well, I took my air purifier outside when the refinery stunk.
Yes. So you were talking about this last week because Windex sets it off inside your house. So you figured, the refinery smell might set it off outdoors.
Well, the refinery was one of the reasons why I bought it. That and wildfire smoke, which is new to my life now. Thank you, nature. Thank you, global warming. So I took it outside, and sure enough, it turned a different color. And it did not do that when the refinery wasn't sticking. So it does, in fact, detect the VOCs and many carcinogens that the fossil fuel industry likes to spew out into the world, including my world, and especially my world.
So were you able to test it then when you couldn't smell the refinery?
That's correct, yes, and it was fine. We had a solar eclipse, Brian.
Yeah, I kind of missed it. I think it was cloudy wherever we were.
That sounds about right. Well, it was cloudy here. And I wasn't getting a whole lot of solar generation, but if you look at the graph that I put on there, you can see exactly where the eclipse was. That is that corresponds to the timing in our city where the eclipse was. And we didn't get, I don't know how much of the eclipse we got, maybe 60% or something. We didn't, but you can see it. And this was in the news because PV Magazine says that there's a 17% daily solar generation loss in the United States overall from
when there's an eclipse.
Just from this little eclipse from this particular one. So that's and apparently the grids had to because there's some states like Texas that are very reliant on solar now. They had to be ready for this. So this is something that I hadn't thought of, like solar eclipses. It's like a Simpsons episode or something. It's just hilarious.
Clearly, it is a downside of clean energy, but it's entirely 100% predictable. Like we've known about, the eclipse schedule for, a long time now.
They know these things centuries in advance. So that if that's not enough time, I don't know what is.
That does help, yeah.
So, this was an annular eclipse, meaning that the moon would not appear big enough to completely block the sun. If you've seen pictures from places that were clear, that was what it looked like. So it's not a total eclipse because the sun or the moon was not as big as it is sometimes. It's further away from our home planet.
Okay, so a story here from Electrek. So this is an e-bike ruling that just happened in the European Union. There was a court case. So the EU Court of Justice yesterday announced a landmark ruling stating that pedal assist e-bikes are actually bikes and not motorbikes or motor vehicles, which means that e-cyclists aren't obligated to be insured in the same way as motorists and can be compensated as a cyclist and not as a motor vehicle driver. So this started because there was a cyclist on an e-bike in Bruges, Belgium, that was hit and killed by a motorist. And the court proceedings concerning compensation for the family brought into question whether or not his family would be entitled to automatic compensation as a vulnerable road user, which would be a cyclist under Belgian law, or if his e-bike should be classified as a motor vehicle, which means the family would get much less compensation. And so this all went to the court in the EU, and they declared that a motor vehicle must be propelled exclusively by mechanical power. The other thing to note in this, of course, we've mentioned before that the EU has different rules regarding the maximum speed of e-bikes. So this probably helps the ruling that in the EU, you can't have more than 250 watts of continuous power output and limited to 25 kilometers an hour. So that is a thing that keeps them closer to being bicycles in the first place. So, perhaps that had an impact on the ruling.
In North America, I believe it's 32 because my bike goes to 32 kilometers an hour and has a 350, I want to say kilowatt, but a 350 watt motor.
Right.
If it was kilowatt, well, I'd be dead. I wouldn't be here right now.
Yeah. And, even 32 kilometers an hour isn't too bad. That's still kind of like bicycle
speed. That's kind of dangerous.
Speed.
It's kind of dangerous, I'll tell you. You got to be on your toes.
These scooters now that can go even faster than that.
Yeah,
so, it's a whole new world. And it made me think of a clip. I brought a clip.
You brought a clip.
There's a movie called In Bruges. Do you remember that movie, In Bruges?
Yes, I started watching it recently, but I didn't make it through. Something else came up.
Anyway, before that movie came out in 1994, I made a segment for a CBC television show called Utopia Cafe, and it was called Bicycles in Bruges, because I got to travel through Europe in 1994 and shoot segments for the CBC television show Utopia Cafe. And one of the places we stopped was in Bruges, in Belgium. It was just kind of startling to me how many bicycles there were. Bruges is a real bicycle town, and apparently it's always been a bicycle town, but in recent years, like starting, back in the 90s, they started making it even more bike friendly. So we made a little segment and I cut out a clip. This is me. It starts with me from 1994. And then we've got a man on the street.
Upcoming, this is shots for bicycles in Bruges, or bicycles in Europe in general, or bicycle shots.
The name of the town over here is Bruges. Everyone has a bicycle over here. It has always been like this for a great deal in town, because it's a very old town, very small streets, and it's impossible to drive with a car inside. So people use the bike because it's, you get very fast from one end to the other end. And it's 2 years or 3 years ago, they really make something for the bikers. The one-way direction and things like this. So they put the cars out town.
The main thing that really surprised me too was that, there's bicycles parked everywhere and none of them were locked, which coming from North America, you just would never see.
How many bicycles have I had stolen because I forgot it in my backyard for 10 minutes? That's about how long it takes when I was a kid to lose my bicycle.
It's bad. Now, I think maybe the really expensive bikes were locked up, but most people didn't have expensive bikes. They were just kind of, ordinary Dutch style bikes. And I'll note too, here in St. Paul, Minnesota, seems like there's pretty decent bike lanes here downtown.
I got sent a video the other day about Edmonton, Alberta being a positive bike city now. They're putting $150 million into it. And they pointed out that that's like the price of one overpass.
Yeah.
The price of one overpass, you get an entire cycling infrastructure throughout a city. It's not perfect. It's not the end all be all, but it's there. So they're working on that now. Brian, we've got a couple letters this week, so let's get to them because they're big fat letters. They're not the little letters where they say, hey, can Brian be less on the show? You know, that type of letter. So this one is from Steph in Belgium. And hello to everyone listening in Belgium. I know we've got some listeners there because we show up on the charts. It says, hello, I'm a listener. I listened to your podcast. I saw on the YouTube channel Energy Transition Crisis, we still need to build out 50-fold the current amount of solar and wind to completely get off fossil fuels by 2050, even if electricity is getting greener. Now, 30 to 40% renewables in Europe, if I recall correctly. So I wonder what multiple of renewable generation is actually needed for full decarbonization. His promise is we'll have an energy crisis this decade by not being able to ramp up renewables fast enough and having not enough investment and potential to extract fossil fuels. I'm not sure if you can cover this topic. Actually, we do cover this topic all the time. If you listen to the show, we touch on this as much as we can because it's kind of what our show's about. So yeah, he wants to know if we can make sense of how much decarbonation can be achieved by 2050. I am quite skeptical that the full decarbonization can be achieved by then, although I think we can still mitigate the effects of global warming even less than 100%. Yeah, we can mitigate the effects if we're not 100%. Brian and I would very much like the world to be completely decarbonized by 2050. Is it possible? It's entirely possible because people much smarter than me who work on this stuff say it is possible. However, I looked at the video and I had some problems with it. Brian had some major problems with it. But thank you for your letter, Steph. I will get into this now a little bit. We will, we love feedback because we can talk about this stuff. We know what people are interested in and it sort of shapes what we talk about on future episodes. So we will get into that. Yes, it's totally doable for 2050. In fact, most people say, experts in the field say that we have 90 to 95% of the stuff in place to get there. And we'll even have some stories on this week's show that talk about that. So I checked out this channel and it's very weird. I did some research on this particular channel. He's released about 7 videos calling it a documentary on how tough the transition is going to be. He doesn't overly, say or give links to who he is, but he titled himself in the video, and I found out that his name is Eric Townsend. He's a hedge fund manager and energy stock trader. He made it big in computers during the tech boom in the 90s and is now retired with a podcast on investing. And I found it strange because he has a donations page, Brian, and the first donation on the donations page is from him for $10,000. What does that tell you? It tells me the guy's a wiener, that he's a scumbag. It's a moral problem. It's an ethical issue if you do something like that. And it doesn't say who he is on the donations page. So yeah, he's trying to, and his goal is $1 million for these 7 videos. Mm-hmm. So I think he's a rat. I smell a rat. I mean, I looked at the information on the video, and of course it's like any other video that's erroneous. It uses real data that's cherry-picked, that is often out of date, and we talk about that on the show. So I'm not going to get into fact-checking. I don't have the time or the energy to go through all of his videos and fact-check them point by point. But generally speaking, this man is a fossil fuels guy. This could very well be an example of the fossil fuel industry paying this guy to make this video. I don't know that. That's, but I suspect something is very wrong. And I think this is an issue. This, watching a video like this and then getting information like Steph did and thinking that it's legitimate and you're trusting it. So I don't know what to tell you other than I don't trust him, but here's a clip from his show.
The point we most urgently need to promote understanding of is that stopping investment in oil and gas exploration and production, ironically and counterintuitively, hinders rather than advances the energy transition agenda, as explained in episode 3. Trying to phase out fossil fuels before phasing in viable replacements just plain doesn't make sense.
Just the fact that he says it just plain doesn't make sense, that tells me he's a propagandist, like it just reeks of BS. So
yeah, and no one's suggesting that we phase out fossil fuels too soon. That would be a terrible idea.
This is an oil industry talking point. that we hear over and over again. Oh, don't think negatively of us, but even my relatives say that. We're not phasing out fossil fuels. We're trying to have a competition for it and phase it out through competition by having something better. And that's just not the case. They worry that every time you build a wind turbine, you're trying to purposely kill oil, and we can't do that.
Yeah. And I'll just say about YouTube, I love YouTube. I get so much pleasure and enjoyment from YouTube and a lot of information, but sometimes you got to really sift through it. And I know that I have found certain channels where I thought, okay, this guy's interesting. You start listening for a while. And then after you've watched a few videos, you kind of think, okay, maybe they're great, maybe they're bad, maybe they're somewhere in between. So, once you sift through and find the YouTubers that are, seem to be doing really good work, it's a fantastic tool for education.
Trust but verify. And you can't just take any old YouTube channel, because this is the problem that people are doing. You have to go to the experts. So he has no expertise, this guy. And neither do I, and neither do you. We're not experts. We're fans of the clean energy transition, but we are discerning as to where we get our information from, and we're careful. There's people that I've started to trust, and then I've lost trust in them, and I realized they're touting obscure things because that gets views. New technologies, because there's this overwhelming belief in the world of people who are following this stuff in the general population that we need something new, we need something magical, because what we have can't possibly be working or can't possibly do it. So he says no fossil fuels have been avoided by renewables to date. That's one of his points. No fossil fuels have been avoided by renewables to date. UMF, I have solar panels on my roof, and I know for a fact that I've 10 tons of carbon from coal and natural gas burning have been avoided from my solar panels. Yeah. I know that I have not burnt gasoline in my electric cars. That's to me, that's tiny, yes, but I have hard evidence that that is wrong, just from my own personal experience. I would suggest you have to listen to not individual YouTubers, but actual climate scientists, or credible published studies that are peer-reviewed, then they get published in the news, and people who are leading analysts of the energy transition, and those working at Bloomberg NEF, for example, even though they consistently underestimate the transition and have to revise and upgrade their outlooks every year, they're still doing good work. You can't just take some guy with an opinion who knows how to string together 7 videos and go on that. And I remember talking about a study that said Canada had to 10x. Remember that on the show? It's wind and solar to meet the transition. I was surprised at how small that was, but you pointed out, well, we've got a lot of hydroelectric in much of our country. Yeah. Not here, but in much of our country.
The grid is already pretty clean in Canada.
I'm getting more judgmental and trying to be more careful. And if somebody says something, then I look to other, I consume a lot of information. A lot of our listeners don't have the time that you and I have to consume everything either. So they only get bits and pieces. And there's this thing where people just love negative things. Like they gravitate to negative information very easily. So yes, I do believe we can fully decarbonize by 2050 because people smarter than me have said so. People who work on this, who are world-renowned leaders in this transition, say we can, and they've outlined how. The question is do we have the willpower to do it quickly? Because I think we should stop thinking about 2050, because that's kicking the can down the road quite a ways, and the climate scientists say that's risky. So we must think about 2030. To meet our goals, we must cut emissions by 50% from, I forget what year, but 50% by 2030. We have to use what is available now, and there's a lot, and go hard and fast. So there's a lot of success stories out there that we highlight on this podcast, and that's what we're all about. So we will take the information that you thought about in your letter, and all letters, and we will use that to form, what we talk about. That guides us, and we appreciate that. Be careful what you listen to, be careful what you watch, and check it, cross-check it. one person's opinion isn't everything. I mean, my brother started following this guy who claimed he was a doctor. And the next thing you know, my bedridden elderly mother was getting coffee enemas because he was completely sold on that. And it took me 3 seconds to look him up and find out that he wasn't even a doctor, let alone, a credible doctor. 3 seconds it took me.
This is the Clean Energy Show with Brian Stockton and James Whittingham.
Okay, so a story here from New Zealand. I feel like we haven't talked about New Zealand in quite a while.
Well, they've got a new government.
Yes, they just had an election very recently. So this story here is from Renew Economy. And it says the new government in New Zealand is going to nix the country's goal of a completely clean grid by 2030. But it says it'll try to fast track renewable projects by pressing local councils to drastically cut the time they take to approve projects. So this is something we've talked about on the show quite a lot, that the approval process for clean energy projects could be a big stumbling block to transitioning everything to clean energy.
Yeah.
New Zealand, of course, is close to Australia. And we know that in Australia, they've eliminated a lot of the red tape for things like rooftop solar. And that's really helped speed up, the installation of that. So it's not an entirely bad story. It doesn't seem like it's like our conservative parties here in Canada who just want to completely pretend that climate change doesn't exist. They're just getting rid of this hard goal of 2030 to clean up the grid. It's a center-right party. That's what it's described by. That's what Wikipedia calls it, the National Party. But it's also a minority government. So in a parliamentary system, you sometimes end up with a minority government where, 2 or 3 parties have to work together to actually keep the government formed. And the players that they may have to partner with are further on the left. So it's possible that those parties will be able to convince them to go a bit more back in the clean direction here. So there was another thing here. They are canceling a pumped hydro project. Pumped hydro is another source of like battery storage, basically. You pump the water up a hill and then pump it down again when you need it. And that can be like a battery. It says that this big project, $15 billion, was coming out to be 4 times more than initially expected. So they want to cancel that. And they're also looking to reverse the ban on offshore oil and gas exploration. So I don't know. This is what's happening in New Zealand. They're looking at getting rid of the clean car subsidy, but then putting in charging stations. They want to do 10,000 charging stations. So I don't know. It's a bit of a mixed bag. It's a new government. They're going to have to play with the other players. So we'll see what actually happens, things happening in New Zealand. And, clean energy gets cheaper every single day, every single month. So there are times when I think, maybe we don't even need subsidies for this stuff. But, the government signals the direction on so many things. And if they can nudge it in the correct direction, the direction of clean energy, it's a good business decision too. Okay, so a story here from Hydrogen Insight. This is a hydrogen news website. And in the US, there has been a massive $7 billion in government funding for hydrogen projects. And again, this is a bit of a mixed bag. Hydrogen in general, too, is something that I think you and I are both a bit skeptical about. There is probably a role for hydrogen, especially green hydrogen made entirely from clean energy, probably a place for it. But this $7 billion in funding, it's going to 7 different regions. It also includes hydrogen made from fossil fuels. So probably not a great idea. Oh, one of them is pink hydrogen, which is hydrogen made from nuclear power. There's all these different color spectrums for hydrogen and how it's made. And green is the gold standard because that comes entirely from clean energy, and green hydrogen I'm hugely in favor of. And there will likely be some uses for that. But, things like battery electric vehicles just get better every year. So, I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, some people think long-haul trucking requires, as I said in the opening, hydrogen. I'm waver on that, and I'm actually pretty skeptical this week based on some new information, a study. You know what? Where I would like to see it, well, for one thing, steel production and cement production. That is and fertilizer production. So there's some definite no-brainers for hydrogen, but also maybe if shipping goes to hydrogen, I think it would actually be a really good idea because there's only so many ports in the world that are busy, like the port in LA, port in Hong Kong, and then various Chinese manufacturing cities. You can manufacture the hydrogen right there near the port, and you can also use it for shipping, but you can also ship it, right? You can also send it elsewhere. It's not easy to do that. It's expensive to do that. But yeah, it's shipping might be a good way to go too. I'm not seeing a lot of progress on that though.
Yeah. And then just one of the specific regions I wanted to mention here, since I'm in Minnesota and I've been driving through, North Dakota, the northern United States. So one of these hydrogen hubs is called the Heartland Hydrogen Hub, and it's Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. They're going to get $925 million.
Really?
And you remember a few weeks ago when I drove to Colorado, I was talking about all the flaring gas wells that we saw in North Dakota. Well, this hydrogen project, it's called a Blue Hydrogen Project, and they are planning to utilize natural gas that would otherwise be flared and turn it into hydrogen. Now, again, it's probably better not to flare that gas in the first place and shut those. But I guess it's a step forward to turn it into.
They had a flaring event in the city that they had to send out a press release about right where we live because it was giant flames. Anyway, yeah, I guess they have to. And Alberta's doing that next door to us. So, yeah, we don't want that kind of hydrogen. We want green hydrogen, ultimately. We want electrolyzers powered by solar and wind. Or even nuclear if we have to, but just keep it clean, people. That's all I ask. Okay, so we have another letter here. This is letter number 2. It says, "Hello, James and Brian. I'm a 26-year-old college student studying power engineering in Ontario. So my son is, 20? He's studying an engineering of sorts, too. And I asked my son, did you send me this letter? Because it sounds just like him. He said, no. First, I wanted to say I listened to your show on my hour-long daily commutes to school. He says, don't worry, I have a Chevy Bolt, and then charging at the college is free. Well, that is a sweet deal to charge. I mean, how many people...
I'd hate to see the tuition bill, but,
No, yeah, tuition bills are scary these days, aren't they? But yeah, that's a very green ride for him. That is a sweet commute. If you have to commute an hour to college and have it for free, I mean, man, you are living a good life. So I have some semi-negative comments. And by the way, we welcome semi-negative comments. I know that a lot of people come and go from our show, so they have problems with things. I never know what they have problems with. So it's always good to know what people are thinking. So, let us know the negative comments to cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. Calling the other side of the argument stupid or unintelligent doesn't help people change their minds about clean energy. I would say it makes your argument unintelligent if it's based on the other side being stupid. That sounds just like my son. Are you sure you're not my son? I mean, it's possible I could have children around the country. I mean, it's possible. Sometimes you both exaggerate. He says, sometimes you both exaggerate, which can teeter on giving out fake news. I would disagree. It may go against your opinion, but I'll get to that later. Sometimes it's just small stuff like saying diesel is loud and smelly. Sure, in a truck, but in a power plant? Okay. James claims the fumes of his neighbor's Corvette choke him. Just makes you guys come across as liberal crybabies, some may say. Well, we are liberal crybabies.
Yeah. Totally.
That car did choke me. I'll explain why. James says hydrogen is a waste of time and gas and diesel will go away. Well, that's kind of putting words into my mouth. Gas and diesel will go away. Of course they'll go away. They'll go away anyway. They were always going away, and we're hoping to speed that up.
It'll take a long time.
In the sake of the climate. Yeah, but they're going to be around forever. In some way, in some small way. What about long-haul trucking? Truckers get paid based on the miles they go. They aren't going to want to stop and charge for hours. So unless we have an alternative fuel source or massive changes in the trucking industry, all-electric everything just isn't realistic at this point. Maybe the solution is massive upgrades to the Trans-Canada highway system to allow for wireless charging of vehicles while they are driving, similar to tests being done in Europe. And on other places too, by the way. This person may also play a villainous role in a way when you talked about Ireland and not allowing LNG imports, how that is good for the environment. but leaving out that not allowing for imports will force them to keep the coal and peat plants open longer, or peaker plants, maybe. LNG would allow them to reduce the CO2 by 60%. Sure, it's not zero emissions, but it's a start. I just think more of a conversation would arm your listeners with the responses they need to convince others that clean energy is the way to go. Thank you, Bradley. This is Bradley in Ontario, Canada, for your letter, and we welcome, like I said, constructive criticism whenever possible. I don't care. I'll take it. I wish more people would tell us when they had an issue with something, like I said. But I also wish, if you disagree with something, come back at us with something credible, a link, show us that we're wrong, and we will correct it if that is ever the case. Don't just sit there and not say anything, because I know if people do take issue, I know they take issues. I guess I'm guilty of being too casual and personal in the show by calling people stupid or things stupid. It's because we do the show for fun.
I think you called somebody an MF earlier in the show.
Well, that's going to be edited out, Brian. That's going to be edited out. We have to keep it clean. So it's because we do the show for fun, not for money, and we just hope people will come along for the ride. However, with feedback, will promise to try harder. As for exaggerating and teetering on fake news, again, let us know. Give us a link if you have if there's you're just not going with your gut. Tell us, a factual thing that contradicts something we said, and we would gladly correct it. Give us facts from credible sources. We're very careful not to discuss non-credible news on the show. Brian and I, we've always from day one wanted to be very careful. We know that it's a big responsibility to talk about this stuff. Fumes from my neighbor's Corvette. It was literally like the driveway is literally next to my house. Like, his door would bang against my house if he opened it. And it came right at my windows. And my kids complained more than I did, by the way. So regarding the LNG terminal in Ireland, Ireland says that they are actually going to focus on the expansion of offshore wind. So by denying it goes against their law to be able to allow fracking natural gas into their country. So they decided they were going to follow that law and not do that. So, yeah, but they didn't say that they're going to increase fossil fuels by doing it. That's not what, you're just assuming. The fact is they're actually saying using renewables as the alternative to make up for it. So they have been thinking about that. As far as installing wireless charging along the Trans-Canada is concerned, I think personally it's trying to solve for a problem that may not exist. It always seems pretty ridiculous to me. I know there's half dozen of these projects going on in the world where they're trying to do it. I don't see it for trucking. I know you could potentially reduce the battery size in buses. I mean, maybe buses is the way to go. I think stationary wireless charging built into roadways for future robo-taxis and garbage trucks, perhaps, or who knows, things that do regular routes. Maybe that's economical. But I mean, you're tearing up the Trans-Canada, and if it doesn't work, you got to tear it up again. And, it's at least 2 kilometers long, and I don't know how much of a charge you can get in 2 kilometers. And wireless charging is not 100% efficient, so it's more inefficient than other ways of charging. So you're wasting electricity, and it's costing more just for the electricity. And then there's, I think you have to be just a couple centimeters of clearance to charge. And I know trucks in Europe have, there's one experiment where they have, like buses, they'll have little things that go up and hit wires that go across highways.
Yeah, overhead wires, yeah.
Here's the big problem, Brian. People assume that the technology that's out there is stagnant, that batteries are what they are and they're always going to be that way. I mean, if you look at the way batteries have gone over the last 10 years, and a lot of our listeners are not doing this, the decline is tremendous. The decline in price and the increase in energy density. I forget what it is, but it's something like over 2 times energy dense just for Nissan Leaf batteries for my car that's in the driveway in that time. And there's, I don't know, it's probably trillions of dollars that are going into battery development right now to improve those. And man, they're actually doing it. There's things in China coming to market. They're not getting a lot of fanfare because everything is moving so fast.
And it's already good enough battery technology, but it's just going to get better. It's already cheap enough for electric cars, and it's just moving up towards other vehicles.
And I'm going to badmouth diesel all day long. We don't need diesel. The quicker diesel gets replaced, the better it is for everybody. I don't care if a power plant is quiet because, diesel power plants are not next door to me. By the way, the refinery makes a lot of noise, and it's like 2 kilometers away at least. It's actually very noisy if you're downwind from it as well. But that's not the issue. The issue is greenhouse gases and particulate pollution that would affect nearby populations. So yeah, it's good that diesel's going away. I don't know how long it'll take to go away, but it's I don't know how long I'll take to go away. I could drop dead tomorrow. And if they freeze my head, I could stick around for quite a while. The quietness of transport vehicles transitioning from diesel to EV is a nice side effect. My kids not breathing VOCs from diesel emissions inside or outside their bus is obviously a big plus as well. And as far as the hydrogen is needed for long-haul transport trucking question, well, I've always said on the show that I'm not 100%, but I have my doubts that it's necessary. There's something that happened this week. I think a lot of people have doubts about battery electric long-haul trucking, but there's starting to be some evidence that it may actually work, and not in the future, but very soon, or even now for some cases. So I think most people have doubts about that, but there's something that has me thinking differently. Here's the story. A Tesla semi-electric truck traveled over 1,000 miles, that's 1,600 kilometers, in a single day in real-world test for a new independent study. It charged 3 times in that 24-hour period, 2 shorter periods of time and 1 longer one. So here it is. The North American Council for Freight Efficiency, they've been doing this test. This is the second time they've done it. They've done it, I think, in 21 and now again this year. And basically, the trucking companies participate in this test. They have electric trucks in their fleet, and they say, you can, just look at our data of what we're doing in real-life operations. So Electric and Clean Technica reported on this story, and others as well. And perhaps the most important takeaway from the event was that electric trucks' ability to match the operations of diesel counterparts, they said. That's them. That's the trucking people saying that, not me. So drivers operating from several depots successfully used chargers throughout each day, helping dispel myths about trucking battery range. Almost half the trucks were using second charge events during the shifts, including Tesla. This is now from truckinginfo.com. They had more information on this. The results already looked promising, according to Mike Roth, the executive director of NACFE. And some, he said, were a bit surprising. Quote, I think the Tesla numbers and even some of those other dynamics that are starting to show that maybe the longer regional haul to base operations might actually be something that's possible, not just hopeful. The Tesla semis were charging at 750 kilowatts. Apparently they're capable of like a megawatt, so that's about 3/4 of their capability if they can get chargers, at the right places that can tap into the grid at that, huge, capability. So battery density is improving. It's not stagnant, Brian. We know that there's been breakthroughs in new chemistries and new ways of doing things. So that's exciting. What is true today will be better 10 years from now. So you have to say, okay, if we're going to, put long-haul trucks into hydrogen, that's going to take a great deal of money to build out that infrastructure. Like hydrogen infrastructure is the most challenging infrastructure to build.
Yeah, it's not like hydrogen is some kind of slam dunk.
So Cambridge professor and co-founder of the Hydrogen Science Coalition, David Seaborn, says it does not make sense for long-haul trucking. Hydrogen trucking is really not going to happen anywhere, he told Australia's The Driven. The vehicles are at least double the cost of a battery electric vehicle and cost 3 times more in terms of energy to run them in an electric vehicle. You could make it on site, but it takes 3 times more electricity to make the green hydrogen you need to take a truck 1 kilometer compared to just charging the damn thing in its battery. So making green hydrogen via electrolysis, compressing and storing it, then using it in a fuel cell to make electricity to power a vehicle has an overall efficiency of 23% compared to 69% for a pure battery electric vehicle, he found, requiring 3 times more land area for wind and solar to generate the same energy return. His UK-based research suggests 1,503 kilowatt-hour battery can get a 44-ton truck up to 686 kilometers on a charge. The difficulty is that long-distance haulage, B double trucks, can average, I think that's what they call them in Australia, an average of 800 to 1,200 kilometers without refueling. But should they? So yeah, trucking regulations can change. In some parts of the world, you have to rest after 4 hours, right? You have to charge. You could just charge for half an hour as you're taking your mandatory rest. They're a little more lax.
And you could change the regulations for how truckers are paid.
Sure. And if the current battery tech can get 686 kilometer range, surely in 10 years, it'll be competitive equally with, 1,000 to 1,200 kilometer range, which I'm sure it probably will. So we'll have to wait and see. I'm not going to bet the farm on hydrogen, and I'm not going to bet against it either, but I'm getting a strong sense based on stuff like this that it may not be necessary. And we have to consider where the technology is going, not where it is today. Yeah,
and Bill Gates very famously said that electric semi-trucks were not possible. It just wasn't, it was the physics would not work because the batteries would need to be too big and therefore too heavy, etc. But the Tesla Semi going 1,000 miles in a day seems to disprove that. It's obviously not exactly the same comparison where it can just run 24 hours a day like a diesel truck could. You do have to stop and charge. But, the first summer I had my electric car, I drove 1,100 kilometers in one day. And it's obviously not exactly analogous. If that was possible for me in a short range car, like that was a 400 kilometer range car, then these other things are absolutely seem to be possible now and will only get better.
And thank you, Bradley, for your letter, and good luck with your studies, studying to be a power engineer. So certainly going to need lots of those in the transition.
Yeah. And just another point about fossil fuels. I think we sometimes talk on the show about I think in Europe in the past couple of years, there were like coal plants that had to be restarted because of, energy supply problems from Europe. And I think every once in a while there's a story like that. And yeah, it's always going to be this balancing act between replacing it with clean stuff. And sometimes you might go too far and have to open up a coal plant. And I think we do talk about that kind of stuff on the show. So, it's not all good news, but I certainly prefer hearing the good news.
It's time for the Lightning Round.
The Lightning Round is a fast-paced look at the latest headlines in climate, clean energy, and transportation.
The company Volt Solar has a solar roof tile that they say could be the roof of the future. Reportedly, Brian, 25%. Only 25% of the cost of a Tesla solar roof, which makes me feel weird because a Tesla solar roof, I wouldn't want to get one. I feel like they're very expensive and they might break, and they're kind of still too new. They haven't done that many of them. Tesla prepares to bring its electric cars to South America, specifically Chile, according to a job posting reported by Electric. So yeah, the Chinese automakers are focusing on South America. So, Tesla's got to get going too.
Yeah, Tesla and BYD, they're both definitely not in every country on Earth, but it's headed in that direction.
A group of Finnish researchers found that block heaters didn't cut fuel consumption or emissions significantly in light-duty gas or diesel models, says Green Car Reports. If you don't know what a block heater is, refer to about 30 of our previous episodes where we complain about life in Canada. From Cherwell, This is Oxford's oldest student newspaper. Independent since 1920. So Oxford's Smith School of Enterprise and the Environment says that wind and solar power could not only meet, but vastly surpass the United Kingdom's energy demands. In fact, it could provide 10 times more than is needed. So they've done this study that contradicts what a lot of our listeners and people in the world seem to think, is that wind and solar cannot, can't do the job. But the report suggests that while nuclear power and other renewables may have their role, it is entirely conceivable to power the entire nation using just wind and solar alone. Conceivable. Not going to do it alone, but it's possible. I mean, if it's all we had, and it kind of is all we have in a major way, we got to get going with this stuff. So that is something few people have still come around to understanding, even those who listen to our podcast, and I know you're all smart people or you wouldn't be here. California Governor Gavin Newsom signed legislation that mandates all new school buses in the state to be electric starting in 2035. Gavin, that's good, but not good enough. How about 25? That would be much, much better. If you're buying a school bus in California in a couple of years, it should damn well be electric. 47% of new cars in the Netherlands are now plug-in cars, Brian. Always good when we hit those milestones.
So that probably includes plug-in hybrids, but still 47%. That is great.
The International Energy Agency says investment in clean energy will rise to $1.7 trillion in 2023. That's this year. So for the first time ever, and I think we may have said this before on the show, but this is another report that says that solar is set to attract more capital than oil production. That's not renewables as a whole. That's solar. Just solar is kicking oil's ass. And finally this week, a story from Bloomberg titled, "Some Good News About the Planet for a Change." So they summarize some of the good news that's going around right now. A year after President Joe Biden signed the Inflation Reduction Act, the most significant climate law in U.S. history, data show that investments for a new green economy are pouring in. $110 billion in private investment, 51 new or expanded plants for producing solar panels, which blows my mind. I can't believe solar panel manufacturing is actually working and coming to the United States. 91 new factories for making batteries and about 170,000 clean energy jobs. This was announced early of August last year. Joe, he's going to spend money. I think they've got a fund where they're going to spend money to actually promote this. I read that this week. So China is on track to almost double its current wind and solar capacity by 2025. That's not a typo. I didn't misspeak. Yeah. I'm not having a stroke. Let me read it again. China is on track to almost double its current wind and solar capacity, which is massive, by the way, in less than 2 years, a year and 3 months or whatever, and blow past the country's clean energy target of 2030 5 years early. We've mentioned that before on the show, according to Global Energy Monitor. That would vastly exceed a goal President Xi Jinping, friend of the show, not really, said in late 2020 of having 1,200 gigawatts of panels and turbines by 2030. They're blowing past it, Brian. What's going to happen in the last half of the decade? And for the first time, companies and governments are raising more money in the debt markets for environmentally friendly projects than they are for fossil fuels. Almost $350 billion was raised from green bond sales last year, and just $235 billion for gas. Africa's first gigantic battery factory in Morocco inked a deal with a Chinese manufacturer to build an EV battery factory with an annual capacity of 100 gigawatts. That is a lot of gigawatts in batteries. It's a lot of double A's. A Bloomberg Green analysis finds that car markets in 23 countries have surpassed the critical tipping point, which we've mentioned before in the show. 5% of new car sales are fully electric, so things start to take off. The same trajectory has been noted in the past with LED bulbs, mobile phones, televisions, and other successful new technologies. And there are now about 4,800 public fast charging stations in the United States. More than a quarter of those stations, Brian, were switched on in the last year.
Wow.
Things, people, are moving fast. We don't have the resources here to cover it all, but it blows what hair I have left back in my head. It's just amazing. That is the lightning round for this week.
And that is our show for this week. So please take the time to contact us, cleanenergyshow@gmail.com. And around social media, Clean Energy Pod is our handle.
We are on the TikTok. We are on YouTube. We are on Instagram. Look for us. Follow us. Have a look at our Clean Energy store for merchandise. The link is in your show notes. Everything is in your show notes as always. We always ask that you rate and review us, like this person did on Apple Podcasts this week. He or she says, great diversity of topics around clean energy in an enjoyable format. That's what I like to hear.
Love it.
But I also will hear negative things too if you have them. So if you're new to the show, remember to subscribe on your favorite podcast app to get new episodes delivered every week. Brian, we'll see you again next week.
See you next week.
This is Pope Francis again. Just a reminder that I am still on strike. I sat here the whole time and didn't say anything, even though I really wanted to.